Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast hosted by Eric Rostad. Join him on his 15-year journey through the immortal books. He'll share what he's learning, explore profound ideas across time and cultures, and share the one thing he always hopes to remember from each immortal book.
Today I'm going to cover Plato's Apology, or the defense of Socrates at his trial. Plato is author 18 out of 200 on my Immortal Books reading list, and this is book 29 from my 2025 reading list. Well, on social media this past week, I posted a photo that I had generated from AI of Socrates sitting at a chalkboard, just writing over and over, "I'm sorry," as punishment. And I was obviously joking. This is not an apology in that sense of saying I'm sorry. If anything, it is the exact opposite of that. But what apology here, what it means is that it's a defense speech in a legal proceeding. And so that's what this book is about. It's not a dialogue. So most of Plato's works are a dialogue where Plato has Socrates talking to another individual, like we saw last week with Euthyphro, or a set of people. And there's this dialogue where Socrates is asking questions and trying to get to the bottom of things and show what people do know and what they don't know. But that is not what this is. This is more of a speech, and it's Socrates' speech when he is on trial. At this point in his life, Socrates is 70 years old, and this is taking place historically in 399 BC. So last week I covered Euthyphro, the first dialogue of Plato's that I read, and in that one we see Socrates on his way to his trial. So whereas Apology, he is in his trial now, Euthyphro, he's on his way to his trial. And so this is a court scene. This is a live action-packed scene. You can kind of picture it in a movie of someone being accused of something, and this is his defense, but it's not a defense on how we would normally think of a defense being, especially when your life is on the line. So I found help. I read a number of different sources for this to prepare for this episode. And one of the things I read, and I'll get into this a little bit later, is Xenophon, and I read his Conversations of Socrates. And so Xenophon has an apology as well. So this episode is about Plato's apology, but Xenophon was a pupil of Socrates, and he also wrote an apology about this trial and what Socrates said. And so one of the versions I read is the Penguin Classics, and there was just this incredible introduction by Robin Waterfield. And so I want to read part of this because I think it helps prepare us to know what is happening here and what is going on and what cases even looked like at this time. So I'm going to read from this introduction. It's a paragraph here, so stick with me, but this gives just great insight into what's happening here. Socrates was tried by 501 of his peers. They constituted possibly 2.5% of the total citizen body. A large number would have known about Socrates for many years and made up their minds about him long ago. Most of the others would have discussed him in the days immediately prior to the trial. And these people, the jurors, were also the judges. No separate judge presided over an Athenian law court. Furthermore, there were no professional barristers, though there was a rising class of professional speechwriters. The state never prosecuted anyone. Private individuals brought actions on behalf of the state, which was in itself a vague concept. Socrates' prosecutor was Meletus. And I'll stop reading there. So we met Meletus last week and in the Euthyphro dialogue. And so that is who is accused Socrates in this case. And I just found that interesting that these 501 peers, so in our trials we have 12 peers, jurors, but there's a judge presiding. There's no judge in this case. The 501 jurors are the judge as well. 501 is just an interesting number as well. To us, that seems like so many people. It just kind of seems like they're trying to get a broad range of people, and to see that it was 2.5% of the citizen population just kind of puts things into perspective of how many people we're talking about here. Socrates was charged with three things. They all kind of fit under the umbrella of impiety, and that came up quite a bit last week in Euthyphro. But here are the three charges. The first one, Socrates was charged with not recognizing the gods that were recognized by the state. The second thing is that he was manufacturing new gods. And then the third was that he was corrupting the youth. And so we'll go through all of those in the next segment. But in this case, he was tried, he was found guilty, and then a penalty had to be determined. So it wasn't like he was found guilty and then it was immediately determined that he was to be put to death. Socrates actually got to suggest a penalty, and he didn't necessarily do so, but first he's tried, then he's found guilty by these 501 peers, and then the sentence is determined after that, again by these 501 peers. This was a political issue. It threatened chaos, and so the state religion pushed for the good of the community, and at a high level here, Socrates was pushing in individuality. He was trying to get, he himself was showing how he was hearing directly from God. So that put him on a different level. But then and part of the corrupting the youth charge was that he was encouraging others in their individuality as well. And so when people are looking at the good of the community, this could be considered something that would lead to chaos. And at this time period, just a few years before 399, there's this shift in Athens from a democracy to an oligarchy. They go back to a democracy, but they're kind of fresh off this chaotic history, and there's this deep fear of tyranny and oligarchy. And so you're kind of set. This trial is set within that time period, which adds a lot of context to the trial. For this podcast, I'm going to have 4 total segments. So this is segment 1, just kind of an introduction. Segment 2, I'm going to go through Socrates' defense against the charges or his lack of defense. In segment 3, I want to talk about 2 other sources that I looked at for understanding the apology, and those are Aristophanes and Xenophon. And then the final segment, I will cover the one thing I'm still thinking about after having read Plato's Apology. I consulted 4 different versions of this in Xenophon. And so the first one was the complete works of Plato, and that's edited by John M. Cooper. And Grube was the person who translated Plato's Apology in that version. That was the first one I read, and there's a short introduction before that as well. Then I went into the Penguin Classics edition, and that's called The Last Days of Socrates, and that contains Euthyphro, Apology, Crito, and Phaedo. And so that was the next one I read. That was translated by Hugh Tredenik, and then Harold Tarrant does the intro on those. Then I got 2 different versions of Xenophon's Apology. I started with the Oxford World's Classics, and that is translated by Martin Hammond. And then I was on Twitter X, someone suggested you need to read the introduction that's done in the Penguin Classics edition of Xenophon's Xenophon, and this one's called The Conversations of Socrates, and that one is translated by Hugh Tredenik again, but then also the introduction is done by Robin Waterfield, and this intro by Waterfield was incredible. I'll be referencing that a lot. That's what I read from earlier in this segment about how the cases actually worked, so that was very helpful. So those are the sources I'll be going through and referring to throughout this episode. Most of the translations that I'm reading from Plato's Apology itself will come from that first option, the Cooper edited version where it's translated by Grube. So going next here into segment 2 and kind of go through the trial and defense of Socrates. I'm not sure that we know the exact date when Plato wrote this apology, but there's some estimates, and from what I could gather, it was within a few years of the actual trial. So we're not talking like 100 years later or something like that. Plato was Plato obviously knew Socrates, and so this is written very shortly after. So the question then is, was this his actual speech? So what we see in the Apology, is this what Socrates actually said at his trial, or is this an embellishment by Plato? Is this almost an attempt to canonize him in a way, having him have these specific responses to the charges against him? How close is this to what he said? And so that's one of the reasons I read another account, and that was Xenophon's account, just to see, do they match? Is what Plato said that Socrates said? Is that what Xenophon says as well? And there's a ton of similarities in the two accounts. There are a few differences, but there are more similarities. But the other thing to keep in mind here, just with it being so close in time of when this was written, is that there would have been a ton of people around that knew exactly what Socrates said at the trial. And so if it was vastly different or, just totally off, we probably would have heard about that, or there would have been people there that would have said, no, this is not how it happened at all. Why are you writing it this way? And so, interesting thing to consider here. I'm sure there were some embellishments, but there's probably a lot of truth into what is being portrayed here. Just, if for no other reason, just that it was so close to the actual time of the events, especially for something that written that long ago. So what I want to do here is go through some of the items in Socrates' defense. And so let's start here. Socrates says that he, through someone else, went to the god at Delphi and sought an oracle. And what the oracle told about Socrates is that there was no one wiser than Socrates. And just first off, that's a pretty odd thing to say in a trial, or a very smart thing to say, I guess, if you're being charged with neglecting the gods, to say, well, I actually went to the oracle of Apollo and here's what he told me. It's a pretty brash, statement. But when Socrates heard that, he almost started a scientific experiment at that point to see if he was the wisest or if there was anyone wiser. And so he just started going around and talking to people and sort of tested that hypothesis to see if there was anyone wiser. So he went to politicians, poets, craftsmen. Those are three groups of people that he said he went to, and he didn't find anyone wiser. But his definition of wiser is that he understood his wisdom to be worthless. And so it's not that he was so much smarter than everybody and he's boasting about this. There is some element of boasting in the defense, but in this case, wiser means that he understood that his wisdom was worthless. The next thing, let me just read a few quotes here. So here's a quote. "For I go around doing nothing but persuading both young and old among you not to care for your body or your wealth in preference to or as strongly as for the best possible state of your soul." End quote. So this is a reoccurring theme throughout his defense. His concern is not for these temporary things, whether it's your body, your wealth, your prestige. It's for the state of your soul. It's for moral aspects of doing the right thing, always doing the right thing throughout your life, a strong sense of justice. And these are the things that he's concerned about. So he keeps referring back to those. And that quote is just a good encapsulation of that. He then talks about this divine sign, and this is a key point in his defense. He's claiming some sort of a direct connection to the divine. And so let me read this quote. "I have a divine or spiritual sign which Meletus has ridiculed in his deposition. This began when I was a child. It is a voice, and whenever it speaks, it turns me away from something I am about to do, but it never encourages me to do anything." End quote. So we've got this voice that Socrates is claiming. So he's got some sort of a direct connection. And you can see how this would be antithetical to the society or the community, where the gods are this presence, and you're told about the gods and you're to believe in the gods, even though the gods themselves are conflicting in what they want, as we saw in Euthyphro last week. But they are telling you what the gods. So if somebody here is claiming, no, I have a direct connection to the divine. I'm getting speech from them, and it's telling me to turn away from something. It's not necessarily telling me to do something, but it's telling me what to turn away from. You can see how that could rub people the wrong way. But again, just a key point there where Socrates is claiming he has some sort of a connection to the divine, and it's an individual connection that he is hearing directly. Another quote, "Death is something I couldn't care less about, but that my whole concern is not to do anything unjust or impious," end quote. So again, just there's this kind of lack of concern about death. He's 70 years old at this point, but his whole concern through his whole life, and he keeps talking about this, is to be just and pious. And if he has to die for that, so be it. Later on, he calls for witnesses, and the first witness he calls is that oracle at Delphi, which is very interesting. But he challenges those present. He challenges the 501 jurors with this: if I corrupt some young men and have corrupted others, then surely some of them who have grown older and realize that I gave them bad advice when they were young should now themselves come up here to accuse me and avenge themselves. End quote. So he's challenging them to call witnesses because one of the charges is that he's corrupted the youth. And so Socrates is going right into that and saying, hey, if I have corrupted the youth, why don't you find some of these men that I've corrupted, have them come here, share their testimony of how I have corrupted them, and then we can see for ourselves. But his point is that I've not corrupted them. If anything, I've caused them to be just, or to live a just and pious life. And if that is my crime, it falls apart, because you're saying I've corrupted these young men, but you cannot even find somebody who says that I've corrupted them. Well, the jurors, the 501 jurors find Socrates guilty, and then they must determine the penalty. And it's in this part where Socrates says this famous line. We are all familiar with one of the parts of this. If I say that it is impossible for me to keep quiet because that means disobeying the god, you will not believe me, and will think that I'm being ironical. On the other hand, if I say that it is the greatest good for a man to discuss virtue every day in those other things about which you hear me conversing and testing myself and others, for the unexamined life is not worth living for men, you will believe me even less. End quote. So I think we probably all heard the unexamined life is not worth living, and that's where we find that in the defense here of his life. Well, the jurors then need to decide what happens next. He's been found guilty. What's the sentence going to be? Is it going to be exile? Is it going to be something else? And they decide that it will be death. To then which Socrates says, "It is not difficult to avoid death, gentlemen. It is much more difficult to avoid wickedness, for it runs faster than death." Let me read a few other things Socrates says here. Death is a blessing, for it is one of two things. Either the dead are nothing and have no perception of anything, or it is, as we are told, a change and a relocating for the soul from here to another place. End quote. He then goes on to talk about the afterlife, and again, this is after he has been convicted. Again, what would one of you give to keep company with Orpheus and Musaeus, Hesiod, and Homer? I'm willing to die many times if that is true. It would be a wonderful way for me to spend my time whenever I met Palamedes and Ajax, the son of Telamon, and ask other of the men of old who died through an unjust conviction to compare my experience with theirs. I think it would be pleasant. Most important, I could spend my time testing and examining people there, as I do here, as to who among them is wise and who thinks he is, but is not. End quote. I love that. There's a lot of talk about the afterlife in here, and what Socrates and Plato, through extension of writing about Socrates, thinks about the afterlife. And there's just this kind of beautiful picture of of Socrates going to the afterlife and saying, who wouldn't want to talk to Hesiod, and who wouldn't want to talk to Homer, and who wouldn't want to interview Ajax and use the same methods I'm using here to ask them about their lives. Who wouldn't want to do that? I get to go amongst the greats, and that's one of the final things in this defense of Socrates, and he's kind of looking ahead to the afterlife with joy. But it's also a telltale sign that, look, I'm going to be doing the same things I'm doing here, the same things that you're convicting me of here. I'm going to keep doing those things in the afterlife. So you don't see a whole lot of repentance here. You don't see a lot of, I'm going to change my ways if you just let me live. There is a bold, you guys have decided this. He says this is a mistake. Athens will live with this for the rest of history, that they killed Socrates. But I am ready for death. Death is not the concern. Death is not the scary thing to me. The scary thing to me is not living justly and not living a life of piety. And look, hey, if I go to the afterworld, I'm going to be doing the same things, and look who I get to talk to there. It's going to be great. So let me go through the three charges again and just say a few things about each of those. So the first, not recognizing the gods recognized by the state. Socrates mentions the gods over and over. But as we saw in Euthyphro last week, he's questioning them. He's questioning the aspect of them not agreeing with each other. And if the gods don't agree on things, how can you base a morality on that? How can you base decisions on what is just or not just if the gods themselves don't even agree on that and even fight amongst each other on trying to determine the answer to that question? So he brings up all these different gods. He talks about how he views them, and even going to the oracle of Apollo, but there is that aspect of him questioning them. So does he recognize the gods recognized by the state? Well, the second thing is manufacturing new gods. And there, again, we have that divine sign and that I mentioned earlier. And what was really helpful was in that Robin Waterfield introduction, he talked about this, because when I was reading about that divine sign, I thought, is this like our conscience? Is this the idea that we have of the conscience of something inside of our head, almost like the good angel and the bad devil on our shoulders, and one's telling us, do this bad thing, and then the good angel saying, no, don't do that. Is it like that or not? And so I found this to be helpful in Robin Waterfield's introduction. He says this: Socrates calls it the divine and claims that it communicates with him. It communicates mainly by warning him if he is about to do something that is not to his advantage. It seems never to have told him what to do, but only what not to do. We should be wary of assimilating it too closely to our concept of conscience, if by that we mean a moral force, because Socrates' little voice appears to have no moral function, nor indeed to consider the future consequences of action, but only to be an immediate intuition. End quote. So that's the idea there of the divine sign and how it contrasts to our idea of a conscience. But the main thing here is that it was not the state telling him, hey, this is what is and what is to be, but Socrates had some sort of connection to the divine, and that was scary to the jurors. The final thing of corrupting the youth. Socrates trained people to be individuals and to think for themselves, and that is something that is dangerous in a time of tyranny or oligarchy. It's dangerous if we consider it just in organizations that we're familiar with. And if someone is too individual, it puts the entire organization at risk if they're questioning kind of some of the foundational aspects of that organization. So you can see how that would ruffle some feathers. In the next segment, I want to look at two other contemporary works of that time to see what we can learn about Socrates and about his trial. I think this week was the point in this reading project where I came to the realization that counting books is no longer really applies to this project. I just like to count the number of books that I've read, just in the sense of it's amazing to me because I would not have gotten anywhere near close to that number had I not had this reading project, but it's just kind of kicked things in gear. And I just kind of like seeing that number. Not that it's like a thing I look to of pride or something, but just that it just amazes me that I wouldn't have gotten through a fraction of these books had I not had this reading project. But now I'm coming to the point where this is a perfect example. So I read Plato's Apology, and I think, I need to read another translation of this just to see how translators how they reference different words and concepts and ideas. And so I got another version, and then I was thinking, okay, did anyone else write about this at the time? Did anyone else write about this trial of Socrates? And then I found out that Xenophon did. And so I got the Oxford World's Classics version of that work, and I was posting about it online, and somebody said, well, you really need to get the Penguin Classics edition because that has this incredible introduction that will help you compare Plato and Xenophon. And so then I got that version. And so, but I'm getting these books, and I end up just reading like 5 pages of it, the introduction, or the apology by Xenophon is only 7 pages long. So I'm getting these, so I can't, it's not like, oh, I read this book. It's almost like I'm doing reference work now of getting different books just for a few pages in how they help me understand different things. So with that in mind, let me just mention a couple works that I want to talk to in relation to Plato's Apology. And the first has to be Aristophanes Clouds. I covered this in a previous podcast episode. I'll link to that in the show notes. But when I read that, I wondered if that had an impact on the eventual trial of Socrates. And so, again, the trial of Socrates is 399 BC. Aristophanes Clouds was performed for the first time in Athens in 423 BC. So this is 24 years before the trial of Socrates. What absolutely fascinates me is that it's probable that Socrates was in attendance at that performance of the play. And the reason that is so interesting is that Socrates is just he's just destroyed. I mean, the way they talk about him, if I had been Socrates and in attendance, I probably just would have been crying and I would have been so embarrassed. It's like everyone in attendance would have been staring at you. And the best way I can think about it is our modern day roasts, where the person is sitting there and someone is just blasting them. And you, I would not be able to sit through that. I would just fall apart. And here's an entire society. But the things said about Socrates in Clouds by Aristophanes are they're disturbing. And when I was reading it, I was just thinking, is there a direct line from this comedy play to the trial? And did this shift people's minds? One of the things I read earlier was that it's possible that people of the 501 jurors, that some of them or most of them came in with preconceived notion about Socrates. And did that start with Aristophanes Clouds? Because in Aristophanes Clouds, Aristophanes kind of creates a composite of the philosopher at the time. And so, and then he calls that person Socrates. And so most of what is said is not applicable to Socrates. It's applicable to different philosophers at that time, but it's put onto Socrates. And so did that lead to this trial? And so one of the things in that episode I said is that the main father in Aristophanes Clouds enrolls at Socrates' school, and it's called the Thinkery. And this is where Socrates just asks him questions, but ends up upending his traditional belief system. And the description of the Thinkery is that it's a place where, for a fee, a person will be taught how to win an argument, no matter whether it is right or wrong. And what we see in the defense of Socrates and in Plato's Apology is that's not exactly how he's portrayed in Apology. He's more concerned with justice. He's not. He doesn't want to teach you how to win an argument, no matter if it's right or wrong. If anything, Socrates is asking questions to expose what you think and perhaps to consider it fresh or for the first time. But this comedy play by Aristophanes put a negative view of Socrates into the air. And I just kind of keep thinking, how long or how much of a role did that play in the eventual trial? And Socrates himself mentions Aristophanes in the Apology here, in his defense. And so it's not like, I wonder if this had an impact. Socrates himself mentions it. So let me read this section really quickly. I must, as if they were my actual prosecutors, read the affidavit they would have sworn. It goes something like this. Socrates is guilty of wrongdoing in that he busies himself studying things in the sky and below the earth. He makes the worse into the stronger argument, and he teaches these same things to others. You have seen this yourselves in the comedy of Aristophanes. A Socrates swinging about there, saying he was walking on air and talking a lot of other nonsense about these things of which I know nothing at all. I do not speak in contempt of such knowledge. If someone is wise in these things, lest Meletus bring more cases against me, but gentlemen, I have no part in it. And on this point, I call upon the majority of you as witnesses. End quote. So there he addresses it head on. He addresses this comedy play from 24 years earlier in how it portrayed him. And he says that is not the case. So if you do plan to read Plato's Apology, it would be helpful for you to read Aristophanes Clouds before you read the Apology. So the second thing I want to highlight here in this segment is the Apology that Xenophon wrote. So Xenophon was a contemporary and a pupil of Socrates. So he wrote a lot about Socrates. There is this element of him wanting to share who Socrates was. And so there is this... It's called the Memoirs of Socrates that he writes, and then he's got this Apology as well. It is only 7 pages, so it's a very quick read. Whereas Plato's Apology is 31 pages. So, but there are similarities and differences, and I do want to highlight those. But let me read first here the purpose that Xenophon says in why he wrote this one. So here we go. Now, obviously more than that, this was said both by Socrates himself and by the friends who spoke in his support. But I did not set out to give a complete account of the trial. My limited purpose has been to demonstrate, firstly, that Socrates' overriding concern was to prevent it appearing that he had been guilty either of any irreverence towards the gods or any injustice to men, and secondly, that he regarded begging to keep his life as out of the question. He had in fact already concluded that it was time for him to die. That this was how his mind was made up became more obvious after the verdict had been reached. Firstly, when invited to propose an alternative penalty, he refused to do so himself. It would not let his friends propose one either, maintaining that any such proposal would amount to an admission of guilt. And later, when his companions were ready to spring him from prison, he would not go along with them, and even seemed to make a joke of it, asking if perhaps they knew of some place outside Attica which was inaccessible to death. End quote. Again, that's Xenophon writing probably within 20 years of the actual trial, and that he was saying, this is my purpose for reading this, to portray Socrates as in this particular way. So let me highlight some of the similarities between these two accounts by Plato and Xenophon, and then I'll highlight just a few of the differences. And in that introduction by Waterfield, he lists 12 similarities. I'll just cover a couple of them here. That Socrates did not prepare a speech for the trial. So that was one similarity that both accounts highlighted. That in some form or another, the divine, Socrates' inner voice, implied that he would benefit from the trial. There's another one, that Socrates referred to the consultation of the Delphic oracle, and another that Socrates refused to escape from prison. So we've got, those were just 4, but there are 12 similarities in the two accounts, even though one is 7 pages and the other is 31 pages. There were also some differences so here are 3 main differences. I'll just read the different sections here. So here's one difference. Anyone coming to defense who has not who has met only Plato's Socrates will be astonished at the confidence, even arrogance, with which Socrates assesses his own importance, end quote. So that's the first one where Xenophon kind of highlights more the arrogance or confidence of Socrates. The second one, of the consultation of the Delphic oracle. In Plato's Apology, the oracle says that there is no one wiser than Socrates, but Socrates interprets this as meaning that he is wisest because he alone knows that he is ignorant. In other words, the humblest man is the wisest. In Xenophon's version, however, the oracle declares that Socrates is the most free, upright, and prudent of all people. And Socrates goes on to justify this with little sign of humility, end quote. So a little difference there in what the oracle said and Socrates' response to it. And then the third main difference here is Xenophon gives, or the reason that Xenophon gives. So Plato claims that Socrates did not wish to live if that entailed his being required to curb his philosophical mission. Xenophon more weakly claims that Socrates wished to avoid senility, end quote. So it kind of a different reason as to why death was okay to Socrates, and so that's another difference there. Now, the question is, for both of these men, Plato and Xenophon, did they whitewash history? Both of these men obviously revered Socrates, so was there some attempt here to whitewash history, especially with him being condemned to death? And this is, again, where the Waterfield introduction helps, and it's in its element of there being subtexts to the trial. So let me read this section here. There were almost certainly subtexts to the trial, the background factors which would have influenced its outcome. This seems inevitable given the emotive nature of the charges, end quote. And what Waterfield does in that introduction is talk about some of those subtexts, just things that we would not catch, some of the cultural contexts and things that are lost to us 2,400 years later. But that certainly played a role in this. Waterfield does say that he thinks Socrates was guilty, and I found that to be interesting. So let me just read this. This is the very end of this introduction by Waterfield. In conclusion, I believe that Socrates was guilty as charged, but his condemnation was assisted by both political and moral subtexts in the trial, end quote. So for the charges that were put against Socrates, when I read the Apology, I'm thinking, man, this is so unjust. Look at this man. He's trying to encourage the young. He's trying to get to truth, and they killed him for it. This is so unjust. So to see Waterfield say that this was probably legit. I believe that Socrates was guilty as charged, but his condemnation was assisted by both political and moral subtext in the trial. That was interesting to come across that, and perhaps to look deeper into these subtexts of the culture at the time that led to this death. In the next segment, I'll cover my one thing, the one thing I always hope to remember from this work. Well, for this work, this is my first time reading Plato's Apology, and so I want to just share a few kind of initial thoughts, and this is my one thing, just in the sense of perhaps my expectations going in and what I came across in this work. So I've heard throughout my life that about Socrates' trial, that he was sentenced to death, that he drank hemlock, I believe, to end his life. So I knew kind of the highlights, but I'd never read his defense at his trial. And so the most shocking thing about it was just his defiance. And it's almost like he doesn't understand the gravity of it. But when you read his defense, it's almost like he more than understands the gravity of the situation, and he just doesn't care. He doesn't care in the sense that death is not the final horrible thing for him. The most horrible thing for him would be to live an unjust life, or to not live in a moral manner, and not live according to this divine voice that he gets, not to obey that divine voice that he has. That to him is worse than death. And you just think of, okay, these 501 jurors there, and not all of them voted to that he was guilty, but you just think, what was their biggest fear? Death. And here Socrates is just going totally against that. I mean, it must have just been such a shocker, and the defiance and knowing that your life is on the line, and going above that, kind of talking at a plane that is at a different level, where that fear, that penalty holds no sway over you. That is just such a shocking thing to come across. And then the other aspect of that is just, it's scary how this flourishing ancient civilization killed one of its best, killed a truth teller. So just begs the question, can society handle this? Can society handle someone like Socrates? Can it handle someone who is seeking after the truth, no matter the consequences, no matter what comes of that? And I've been reading Greek works now for 2 years, 2.5 years, and just am loving it. And it's like, what civilization created these things? Like how did Athens, how did Greece come about to where we get these works out of this time in this era, and the just incredible works that we're still reading today? How did we get those? But then you've got the flip side of but then how did they kill one of their best? And so that's kind of my disturbing one thing that I'm left with, along with, so maybe two things, I guess, the defiance of Socrates, but then just this disturbing aspect that they killed one of their best. I have a question too, coming out of this. Is there something Socrates could have done to avoid this outcome? And I think so. I mean, he probably could have answered the questions in a way that would have appeased the jurors, and maybe not been so defiant to where they didn't, maybe they had a little more heart for him than wanting to kill him. I don't know though, just with the preconceived notions they had about him, whether that was from Aristophanes or other people, or just kind of the cultural conversations going on at the time. But I think there's probably something Socrates could have done to avoid the outcome in his responses, and maybe if the apology would have been more of an apology, as we know, in the sense of, man, I'm so sorry I did this, would that have changed the outcome, or was it a set and determined thing? But Socrates, he wasn't trying to avoid the outcome, and that's one of the main points here. He didn't want to avoid the outcome. That was not his concern. He had other concerns, and death was the least of those. So in conclusion here, if you are selecting works of Plato to read, you definitely want to have this one on your list. And there's always the question of what order do you read the works of Plato, and I'll be commenting on this throughout my time here. I'm going by the order that is in the Plato Complete Works, edited by John M. Cooper. And so Euthyphro was first, and then Apology was second here. And so we're getting at the end of of Socrates' life. And so chronologically, it would make sense for this to be towards the end. But I think the helpful aspects of this is that it shows us as the readers, it shows what his society thought about him right at the get-go. So we see, okay, we're about to read about the dialogues of Socrates and what he challenged people with, and the questions he was asking. But this, at the end, this is what society thought about him. And then we also see, especially in Apology here, what Socrates' core beliefs were in the midst of this. I mean that's the most intense pressure you go through in your life, of being put on trial for death. Your mind will concentrate. I mean, you're going to be thinking of either how do I get out of this, or what are the most important things that I want to share, because death is potentially looming here. This is going to concentrate my mind on my core beliefs. And so what does society think about Socrates? And then what does Socrates himself think? I think that's really important to know those things going into the rest of his works. So I vote for putting this at the beginning of your reading. So definitely have Apology on your list of works that you read by Plato, and perhaps put this at the beginning of your list, just so you see those two things, society and then his Socrates' core beliefs. I was very interested as well in the presentation of the afterlife. This is something I'm tracking. I think it started when I each year I start by reading straight through the Bible, and it just struck me the first reading of doing that in the year 2020 that heaven is rarely mentioned in the Bible as a whole. A lot more in the New Testament. You've got the idea that God is in heaven, but just especially in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, there's not this aspect of you go to heaven, the good go to heaven. There's Sheol, there's this afterworld, but there's not this distinction that I hear so often now of heaven and hell. And so that just struck me. So I'm curious, and as I'm reading works from that time, where did these ideas come from? Where do our ideas of heaven and hell come from? Do they come from the Bible? Do they come from other works? And here you've got Socrates talking about the afterlife, and you've got a very clear aspect that he believes, and he even states, like, as we've heard of the afterlife, we will be able to talk to Homer and Hesiod, and we'll be amongst these people, and that's a very specific idea of the afterlife, as opposed to just dying in nothing happening, or being in a place of shades where can you talk to people, or is it just kind of this weird where nothing's happening? Is it a heavenly thing? Is it where Helen ends up going, the Elysian Fields? Is it that, or is it Hades? What's going on here? So I'm it's something I'm tracking as I'm reading, and so I was very interested in what Socrates had to say of his idea of the afterlife, and he viewed it in a very positive way. Even when Homer kind of talks about it as this type of situation where Achilles in life is this grand fellow, and now he's just one of the shades in Hades. So I'm tracking that. I found that to be interesting. So what's next for me? Well, I'm calling it the Plato Project, and I've just decided to read all of the works of Plato, the complete works, and I'm going through this edited version by John M. Cooper. That's the order I'm going in. It might take me many months to do that, but why not? Why not read all of the works of Plato? I'm actually going to take, as I say that, I'm going to take a quick break from Plato to read Poetics by Aristotle, because I lead a monthly short great books reading group, and our next book is Poetics, and we're covering it Monday in person in Franklin, Tennessee. So if you live in the Nashville area, please come to that. It'd be fantastic. It's 7 p.m. at Landmark Booksellers. Again, Poetics by Aristotle. This is the first time I've ever read this work. I've seen it referenced so many times in different Greek works that I've been the introductions where they talk about, here's how Aristotle talked about tragedy and comedies and all that. So I've started that. Very, very interesting. I'll finish that by Monday. And then if you are interested in discussing that online, I'm going to be covering that in a Zoom call on, I believe it's Wednesday, September 24th. And so to join that, all you have to do is become a paid subscriber here on Substack, and you can join those discussions. And so yeah, if you're interested in that, just become a paid subscriber. You can do that as little as $5 per month, and you'll get the Zoom information about that call. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I would love to hear from you, especially if you have read Plato's Apology, if you have thoughts about it that you would like to share. If I missed something or if I misrepresented something, please let me know. I'm here to learn. I'm not here to think I know everything, but I'm sharing what I gathered out of this, and if something is incorrect, please do let me know. I welcome that. You can email me at eric@booksoftitans if it is something, booksoftitans.com, if it's something you just want to share with me. If it is a comment on the work, I would ask that you do that on Substack. That's where I post the podcast episodes. And then that just allows for there to be conversation around that. So other people can see what you wrote. They can comment on it. We can get a nice little conversation going there. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter. It's just @BooksOfTitans. And check out my website. I've got two different parts of it. One is the Substack, where that's just @booksoftitans.com. And then I've got my reading lists at books.booksoftitans.com. I'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.